whole grain beer bread scones. A hearty twist on a classic scone recipe that utilizes the fermented quality of beer to add complexity and depth of flavor, plus a few extra ingredients to boost up the nutritional value, making this an excellent choice for a breakfast on the go. Hey friends, today I've got a recipe for you that has been a big hit around here lately. Basically, I'm taking two things that I always loved, but weren't necessarily that good for you. I'm talking about scones and beer bread. Both of them are made with lots of butter, white flour, white sugar, not a whole lot of real nutrition there. But I'm taking the two of them, combining them together, and then boosting up the nutrition with some hearty whole grain ingredients. I'm excited to show you this recipe. I love them so much. I think you're gonna like them too. So let's check it out. I'm going to show you two different versions of this recipe by changing up the flavor and the shape of the scones. I'll put the recipe ingredients here so you can take a screenshot for later. I like to change things up by using different kinds of pans because you get a different result from each one. One I'll be using the 11x7 pan and one in the 13x9, and we'll see how it turns out. First, line your pans with a sheet of parchment paper and fold it at the corners so it stays in place. Now we're going to take a look at our ingredients. It all starts out with white whole wheat flour. This isn't always as easy to find, so you can use regular whole wheat, but it will add a heartier and more nutty flavor. After that, we will need some old-fashioned oats, some ground flaxseed meal, salt, baking powder, honey, coconut oil, and beer. You can use any variety that you like, and you'll get different qualities based on each one's particular flavor profile. You can also use other types of malted beverages, such as a hard cider or hard iced tea. Since I'm doing a double batch, I'll take 2 bowls and begin measuring out my flour. So that's 2.5 cups of white whole grain flour in each bowl. Then I'm going to measure 1 cup of the oats and add it to the cup of a blender and grind it up into oat flour before adding that to the bowl. Then it's going to be 2 tablespoons of flaxseed meal, followed by 1 tablespoon of baking powder and 1 teaspoon of salt. Now comes the part where we get to add the specific flavors for each one. For one version, I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of walnuts, and the other, I'm going to use these dried blueberries. I've got a 3.5 ounce bag, which is really only that much, so I'm just going to throw in the whole bag. Add the mix-ins, along with about a teaspoon of cinnamon. This won't be too noticeable because of the bold flavor of the whole wheat, but I think it adds a nice background note. Give your dry ingredients a good stir, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next part of the recipe. In a small bowl, measure out 5 tablespoons of coconut oil. My coconut oil happens to be solid, so I'm going to measure 4 heaping spoonfuls and consider that good enough. Then measure 1/4 cup of honey and add that as well. I want these items to mix together easily, so I'm going to add a small amount of the beer to each bowl and then pop it in the microwave just until it's warm enough to melt the coconut oil. Once melted, stir together with a fork just to make sure the honey is fully incorporated through everything. Once that's well mixed, dump the whole thing into your dry ingredients and then add whatever's left over in the bottle of beer. Stir together with a fork to make sure that the dry ingredients are incorporated, but be careful not to over-mix the batter. I'm simply going to scrape around the sides and the bottom to make sure I don't see any more of the dry flour, and once it's mostly done, I'll leave it alone. Now add the batter to your baking pans. This happens to be the one with the walnuts added, and I'm using the 11x7 pan. Do your best to spread it out, even though the batter is kind of thick and sticky. Next, the batch with the blueberries goes into the 13 by 9 pan. It is a little bit more challenging to spread it out in a thin layer, but if you work it back and forth, eventually it gets there. I'm intentionally leaving textured lines with the fork because I like the way that it bakes up with nice crispy edges that go golden brown. I'm going to place these in the oven side by side and bake it at 375 degrees for around 45 to 48 minutes. Hey, while this is hanging out in the oven, why don't you hang out in the comments section and let me know what you think. When they're finished baking, I move the pans onto a wire rack to begin cooling. I don't want it to get soggy, so after it's had about 5 minutes to firm up, I can remove the pan and the paper, allowing them to cool completely. Now it's time to cut into individual scones. For this recipe, I think it makes 8 decent-sized servings. The ones cooked in the 11 by 7 pan will be a little bit thicker, which gives you the option to split them in half, and then you can toast them and top with things like butter and jam. The batch in the 13 by 9 pan will be wider and thinner than the others, so I like to cut them first into the 8 portions, and then after that cut each one on a diagonal, making 2 scones per serving. I like to eat them just like this, warmed up in the oven or toaster oven, along with a nice cup of coffee or tea. If you're looking for a recipe for soft, tender, delicate scones, this is not the recipe for you. These scones have got some heft. When they bake up, they're crispy on the outside, they're very hearty, they got lots of energy that will fuel you through your day. Not only that, they keep for a week in the refrigerator, they transport well, they reheat well, and they simply taste amazing. I seriously can't get enough of these scones. They're hearty, they're packed with energy to keep me going, and I just think they're fantastic. Give it a try.